Alright, you're probably looking at the title, you see Mario and story in the same sentence, and you're about ready to tear me a new one saying, "What? You're crazy. Mario doesn't need a story. It's always been about the gameplay. It doesn't need anything else." And you're right. Technically, Mario doesn't need much of a story element since he's made it this far without one. But I implore you to keep in mind that this is simply an opinion piece. I grew up with Mario, and when I was a kid, I never expected him to have much in the way of a compelling narrative. Part of it was due to hardware limitations being more prominent at the time than they are today, so it wasn't exactly possible for developers to give us fleshed out stories in their games, given the hardware they were running on back then. That's coupled with the fact that I was also still just a kid. I didn't really have standards or expectations that I hoped Mario would meet. But that was then, and this is now. Technology has come a long way, and in the gaming industry, it's almost expected now that games will have more story elements incorporated within their gameplay. I'm older, and my tastes and preferences have changed a lot over the years. The plain and simple truth is that when I look at Mario, as much as I still love him for the fun and simply addictive gameplay experiences he provides, I still wish he would grow up a little bit along with me. The biggest opportunity for this growth, as you should probably have gathered so far if given nothing other than the video title, is that I wish Mario did a little more in the way of story. Now, Mario does have a plot, mind you, but it's not really something anyone could go and do an in-depth discussion of without immediately steering into fan theory territory. Princess Peach gets kidnapped by Bowser. Mario travels across the Mushroom Kingdom, typically consisting of 8 themed worlds, to thwart Bowser and rescue her. There's nothing inherently wrong with this premise, it's just that it really goes nowhere. It leaves no room for growth, offers no real opportunities for character interactions or development, at least not in the way it's executed right now, and there's just nothing really memorable about it. For someone who ventures across exotic lands and embraces the spirit of adventure, not a whole lot happens. Not to mention that this whole damsel in distress plotline has been recycled ad nauseum for each and every main series Mario game for years, almost since the beginning. I don't know about anyone else, but I'd like to see this change a little bit. Mario and his crew are such simple characters. This can be considered a problem, but it can just as easily be interpreted as untapped potential as well. I want to see Nintendo do more with these characters. When you look at Mario, what personality traits come to mind? I don't know about anybody else, but my mind instantly draws a blank when I ponder this question. That's not to say that Mario has no emotions. He can certainly express happiness, sadness, surprise, or anger, but we don't see much of that outside of his immediate facial expressions. We don't know really anything about what Mario thinks, what he likes or dislikes, what his aspirations are for the future, what he admires about his friends, hates about his enemies, and why. What I'm getting at here is that as iconic and recognizable as Mario is, we really only get that from his gameplay. As a fictional character, there's really not much to say about Mario. He has the personality of a plank of wood. Please don't misunderstand me. I'm not trying to paint Mario's gameplay focus as a flaw or a problem because it isn't. Gameplay is something Mario has down to a science, and that itself should never change. But I'd just like to feel more motivation or satisfaction from engaging in these experiences. I'd like to see why it's so important for Mario to rescue the princess once again for the umpteenth time. Why does he never get tired of it? Does he even realize how many times this has happened, or is he just blissfully unaware of that? I want to know more of what makes Mario tick. The Mario lore as a whole is a complete mess because Nintendo of Japan, Europe, and America can't all seem to agree on what should be considered canon in regards to Mario's origins or facts about the mushroom world he lives in. Do Mario and Luigi actually come from Brooklyn, or is that just something Nintendo of America came up with? How in the world did Mario go from riding on Yoshi's back as a baby in the Yoshi's Island games to where he is now? It doesn't help either that series creator Shigeru Miyamoto seems to be constantly changing his mind about what Mario myths or beliefs by fans are true or false. How can the Koopalings be Bowser's children canonically in Super Mario Bros. 3, and yet now they suddenly aren't? There's plenty of joking around to be had with the implications behind Miyamoto claiming to be Bowser Jr.'s mother, but I would like more of a serious response to that question, since Super Mario Sunshine played around with that idea so much, but left us with more questions than answers. And how in the world am I supposed to believe that Mario is only 24 years old? I'm only 2 years younger than him, and I don't have a mustache that on point. Then there was the fact that Super Mario Bros. 3 was essentially all a play, and the characters were actors. Miyamoto even confirmed that himself. But does that mean all the Mario games are plays? If so, then who are these actors behind the roles? What are they like when they aren't acting? Maybe I'm making a big deal out of nothing here, as Nintendo clearly doesn't take any of this stuff seriously, and they only respond to the questions for fun. That's all well and good, but I'm just a passionate fan, and I'm curious. I would like to learn a little more about my childhood hero and the mythical world he jumps around in. That's all. Think of other pop culture icons like Mickey Mouse or Bugs Bunny, or maybe even SpongeBob. People know and love these characters because of their personalities, their stories, their interactions with others, and their adventures. All of that blends together to create memories for the audience. You remember things about these characters, the way they act, the things they say or do, whether they're being clever and mischievous, goofy and off the walls, sarcastic and cracking jokes, or what have you. Mario is definitely up there as an icon of pop culture like Mickey, Bugs, or SpongeBob, but just not quite in the same way. Mario doesn't really say anything or act in any particular way that makes him stand out. Mario's known more for his games and how they play, not for who he is as an individual character. Maybe that isn't a problem. Maybe that's what makes him stand apart from the other three characters I just mentioned. But maybe still, he could become an even bigger star if he had more of a personality to be explored and showcased. Nintendo is getting into making their own films, so who knows? Someday soon we might very well see a Mario movie that gives him and his friends more of a story to engage and show themselves off in. I think that would be fantastic for Mario to make a name for himself in other mediums than just gaming. After all, the kids of this generation are not growing up the same way older ones did. They don't all have the same passion for Mario or even Nintendo as most of us older gamers do. They're growing up with mobile games, Minecraft, and mature titles on other platforms. Nintendo just doesn't have that same overwhelming dominance in the gaming industry as they did back in the 90s. I think it would be clever if Mario could reach out to these kids and other general audiences as well through other mediums besides gaming, and attract them to explore his roots in video games as well as Nintendo's other franchises and offerings. It's still too early to say anything for certain, but I'm very excited to see what Nintendo does as it begins to explore other mediums and opportunities to market its characters to more of the general public. I'm sure I've frightened some people already, so let me take a step back and clarify something. When I suggest the idea of Mario games having an actual plot, I don't mean that I want something super complex or gritty and mature or anything like that. I'm by no means implying that I want a sophisticated and thought-provoking plot that tugs at players' heartstrings in a mature title developed by Telltale Games or anything like that. I mean, personally, I think that would be pretty cool to see a more grown-up Mario, but that's just me. I don't at all expect Nintendo to take that approach. It simply isn't realistic. No, when I suggest the Mario series having a plot, I mean give it a little more depth and substance without losing itself completely. The gameplay should always be the #1 priority, and given Nintendo, I have faith that it always would be. But I would love to see the games take a slightly more cinematic approach. Give us some cutscenes in between gameplay segments. I don't want the only story to be the opening cutscene that shows Peach getting kidnapped, and then literally nothing until the credits roll. Show us some bumps along the road. What are some interesting, funny, cute, or scary things that happen to Mario and Luigi while they're on their journey? What is Bowser doing while he's waiting for the inevitable confrontation with Mario? What is Peach doing while she's waiting to be rescued? These are just a few things I think some cutscenes could explore. To better illustrate my point, let's look at some other platforming mascots. First up, there's Mario's speedy blue rival himself, Sonic. Now, I know Sonic's relationship with story is kind of controversial, so let's just take some baby steps as we work through this. Sonic's stories are pretty hit or miss. They're not always well received. Their premises or executions can come off as ridiculous or confusing. But I feel they do get at least a few things right. Aside from speed, the one advantage I think Sonic has always had over Mario is that he actually has a personality. Sonic is cocky, adventurous, short-tempered, wisecracking, and easygoing. He's very free-spirited and does what he wants. Sonic hates being confined or forced to sit still. The Blue Blur loves the thrill of running so fast and faces every new challenge head-on. Whether or not these characteristics make Sonic a likable character is up to you, but I hope you see where I'm going with this. Sonic is able to have stories in his games because he has an identifiable way of acting. He reacts to events that happen while he's on his adventures. He has real chemistry with his friends and witty banter with his enemies. Now, some people can make the argument that Sonic doesn't have as much interaction with his supporting cast as he should, aside from characters like Tails or Eggman. I agree, and I think that's an area where Sonic himself can aim to improve. But even so, what he has right now still tells more of a story than what Mario has. Whether you like Sonic or not, he at least takes steps to stand out. He's not just Mario's old rival from the 90s. Sonic always tries to provide some story, incentive, or reasoning as to why he's running all over the place in each new game. Some people like the way he does that, others hate it. But at least Sonic tries at all, and at the end of the day, Sonic is still memorable as a character because of that. Not all of Sonic's stories have been great, and when they're bad, like Sonic 06 or Shadow the Hedgehog bad, they're really terrible, and they can be destructive to the franchise's image. I can see why Nintendo might look at Sega's missteps with Sonic and be hesitant to do anything like that with Mario out of fear of ruining his own image. But I think they've been leaning so far back that they're now on the other end of the spectrum to the point where Mario really doesn't do much of anything, and he can come off as kind of bland or boring when examined purely as a fictional character. But Sonic has had some enjoyable, or at the very least tolerable, storylines. Look no further than Sonic Unleashed, Colors, or Generations. These stories are generally harmless, and they do a lot of good to showcase what Sonic is all about outside of gameplay. Heck, say what you will about the voice acting or presentation of Sonic Adventure 2's story, but you have to admit that Shadow's character development was pretty solid, despite the fact that it would be ruined by later installments. There are some diamonds in all of the rough that make up Sonic's stories, and I think Mario and Nintendo could learn a thing or two from what Sonic has done over the years, both his successes as well as his failures. Moving on, Mario could even draw narrative inspiration from some of the platformers under Sony's belt. Just look at Crash Bandicoot or Spyro, when they were in their prime and actually were part of Sony, or any of the PS2 era mascots like Ratchet and Clank, Jak and Daxter, or Sly Cooper. None of these characters had Shakespearean levels of story. Most of them involved platforming to save their worlds from some evil bad guy or force. But that didn't stop any of them from having cutscenes where they could interact with other characters or developments in the environment or plot. These characters had conversations, some cracked jokes, and others were serious or sarcastic. People remember these games, these franchises, and these characters primarily for their gameplay, but they also had neutral or inoffensive story elements sandwiched in between the gameplay. I would love to see Mario take a story approach from any of these guys, one where gameplay is still ultimately the dominant and driving force of the game, but story does play a part in fleshing out the characters or the universe they live in. I'm sure by now you've probably already posted a comment mentioning the Mario RPGs, and I think that's a great subject to talk about next. Perhaps I have been selling Mario a bit short so far. The RPG titles, specifically the Paper Mario and Mario & Luigi franchises, have done a pretty great job of fleshing out the Mario lore. But the problem is that these games are generally viewed as spin-offs of the main series, which means a lot of the character interactions, personality, and world building are not canon to the Mario franchise as a whole. Fan-favorite characters from these games, like Fawful or Dementio, have never appeared in any of the main series titles, or even other spin-offs like Mario Kart or any of the sports or party titles. It's like Nintendo just sort of treats these games as part of alternate timelines or universes, and that they are never allowed to have any sort of impact on the main series itself. It's a shame because I love what these games have done for major Mario characters like Luigi, Peach, and Bowser in terms of dialogue or personality. But we just don't really see any of that in the main titles. I think there are elements that can be pulled from the RPG franchises and used towards this Dream Mario narrative of mine. In the Paper Mario games, Peach has a very humorous character trait of being sweet and caring towards her friends and the allies she makes, as you would probably expect her to act as a princess, but then she's cold, sassy, and cynical towards Bowser or anyone else who kidnaps or hits on her. I love this idea of Peach having a sweet side and somewhat of a sassy and independent side too. I'd gladly take anything more from her than just the helpless provider of a cake at the end of the adventure. If you watched my last installment of Brawlmaster Unscripted, which is where I originally got the idea to make this video, you might remember how I was discussing Bowser's unique personality in the RPG games. I love how he can be evil or silly depending on what the story requires. He can have moments where he's a pretty funny joke in Paper Mario, or where he's an awesome, fearless powerhouse in the Mario and Luigi games. I don't understand why we have never seen any of this in the main series Mario titles. I know nothing in these RPG spin-offs is really canon, but why can't it be? I suppose it could be argued that these games aren't traditional platformers. They're much grander in scope, and players are forced to spend a lot more time exploring them, so story elements are kind of the glue that holds these games together and gives them purpose. But I wish we could just take a little bit of that world building and sprinkle it in the platformer games or something. I'm not advocating that Mario retires from platforming and becomes a full-fledged RPG series, but there's a reason these games have been so popular with fans aside from the gameplay they offer. They offer something that the main games do not. I think the main series could better itself from tearing a page or two out of the Mario RPG book. Really, the only real sign of an individual personality in the Mario series that is pretty much canon at this point is Luigi being timid and cowardly. A lot of people really enjoyed this fleshing out of Luigi's character because it made him more unique. He became more than just Green Mario or Player 2 or Mario's brother. He finally had something that made him stand out, something that fans could identify and appreciate him for. And this behavior only really started becoming prominent after Luigi's Mansion first came out. Luigi had been around for a long time at that point before that game came around. But I think there's something we can take away from Luigi's sudden character growth. It's not too late to introduce this stuff. I believe Nintendo could flesh out all of these characters at any time if they really wanted to, but they just aren't motivated to do so. Be that as it may, it might be in their best interest to start looking into this now because, as I said before, Mario is not as big with kids today as he was in the past. Brand recognition and his games still sell him quite well to the masses, there's no denying that. But he still has room to build a more relatable or interesting personality for general audiences to connect with, so he can become even more popular outside of gaming. If nothing I have said so far has convinced you that Mario could use more narrative elements in his games, then allow me to invite you to just look at Rosalina. She was introduced with a deep backstory in Mario Galaxy that fans loved, and it almost didn't even make it into the game at all because Miyamoto is stuck in the past and doesn't recognize that games have evolved and become so much more than just Pong, Pac-Man, or Donkey Kong. People loved Rosalina's story so much that she became one of the most popular Mario characters in recent memory and has gone on to appear in almost every single Mario spin-off game since her debut. Imagine people getting as excited for the rest of the cast as they do for Rosalina. This is what I'm talking about. Give us reasons to care about these other characters. They've been around for so long that even though people do love them just because they've been around for years, some people may have admittedly grown tired of them. Introducing story elements or origins to the main Mario canon would be a fantastic way to revitalize interest in these characters, give them a fresh coat of paint, so to speak. If this means keeping Miyamoto far away from the process, then so be it. I know people like to argue that Mario really doesn't have a canon, but then I ask, why not? Why can't it have any degree of consistency to reward people for caring for this long? I will certainly agree that if not done right, story elements could butcher the Mario characters, and that's probably why Nintendo has been so protective and hesitant to do that. But that doesn't mean there aren't potential benefits, that there isn't any potential growth or further success for this franchise if it is done right. There is one other elephant in the room that is pretty hard for me to ignore. I alluded to it briefly already, but now we need to talk about it. Super Mario Sunshine, although not being one of my personal favorite Mario games, did have more of a narrative angle to it. Nothing monumental, but there was at least some attempt. There were cutscenes and dialogue, and when I think about it, Sunshine actually came pretty close to the storytelling style I want to see in Mario games. The gameplay is still the focal point of the game, but the story at least tries to give players a sense of purpose or progression for all of the platforming and keep their attention until the end, even if it did it quite loosely. The only problem is that a lot of people didn't like Sunshine's cinematic approach. People thought the voice acting was bad and that the story was flat out unnecessary. Now, of course, everyone is entitled to their own opinions about this, but I personally did not think that Sunshine's story was the worst thing ever. In fact, looking back on it now, I actually kind of liked it. Sure, the voice acting wasn't going to win any awards, but I don't believe that was because the voices themselves were bad, or that giving these characters voices should never be attempted again. From what I've noticed, it seems that the people who did not enjoy Sunshine's story were so burned by it that the very idea of Nintendo attempting anything like this ever again is preposterous to them. Once again, differing opinions. If you didn't like Sunshine's story, that's fine, and I'm certainly not trying to change your mind about it. But here's something I think people need to consider. Did Sunshine's narrative ruin the Mario franchise forever? No. Granted, Nintendo seems to be pretty afraid to try anything like Sunshine again since Mario Galaxy's story was so much looser. But Super Mario Sunshine was released way back in 2002. Nintendo was experimenting with a lot of new stuff during the GameCube era, and not all of their experiments were bad. Luigi's Mansion was well received enough for it to eventually get a sequel on 3DS. Wind Waker went on to become one of the most beloved titles in the Zelda franchise despite the initial backlash to its art style. And people fell in love with Metroid's jump into 3D with the original Metroid Prime. Change is not always bad. Some of their changes worked, like the examples I just gave. Others, like Mario Sunshine's narrative approach, did not. Regardless, Nintendo is not the same company now as it was back then. If Nintendo were to go back and try again at giving Mario more of a narrative, that does not automatically mean we would see an exact repeat of Sunshine. They could get different voice actors, or give them better voice direction than they did for Sunshine. They could bring in more writers, like the person who gave us Rosalina's backstory, or give them clearer guidelines of how they do and do not want the Mario characters portrayed outside of gameplay. My point is that Nintendo is very careful with the Mario property now. But I think if they had just a spark of that experimental mindset from the GameCube era, they could give Mario a story and really get it right. They could do better than Sunshine this time around. But that's because their restrictiveness as a company would keep things under control, and any embarrassing or cringeworthy moments would be much more likely to be avoided. I have faith that if Nintendo were to attempt to give Mario a story again, they would be much smarter and more careful about how to do it. They would be disciplined enough to do it right. But you shouldn't take my word for it, they'd still have to prove it. Now, assuming I'm right about anything I've said here so far and that a more narrative-focused Mario is actually possible, I have some ideas for what I'd like to see from it. It's difficult for me to really come up with any distinct personality for Mario, since we have literally nothing to work off of. He could be more humble as a modest plumber, or they could work off the angle of Mario being somewhat arrogant since he saved the Mushroom Kingdom so many times that he could be considered a celebrity. Of course, I think the arrogance angle could only work as long as he meant well at heart and got put in his place humorously when it was necessary. Otherwise, all I can really come up with for Mario specifically would be just vague ideas of him building off of his interactions with others. He could have some funny brotherly moments with Luigi, puppy dog infatuation for Peach, and a somewhat childish rivalry with Wario or Bowser or something. Luigi, I think, should still have his cowardly side, since that has already been established in the main Mario canon, and it would just work. I really think Peach should take elements from her RPG incarnation. She's still generally sweet, proper, and maybe even somewhat ditzy, but I do really think that she should have her moments where she's aggressive or sassy, like when Bowser or other people hit on her. I could see Peach being bored and unimpressed by Bowser kidnapping her after he's done it so many times. Bowser could go in any number of directions. He could be a serious threat, or he could be a complete pushover when the going gets tough. Being a king, Bowser could have his moments where he's spoiled or childish, and since he's been beaten by Mario so many times, there could be occasions where Bowser demonstrates that he is, well, not all that bright. But if nothing else, I do think Bowser should be loud, rude, and assertive, and that he should strike fear into his minions and the peaceful denizens of the Mushroom Kingdom. Referring back to the Unscripted, I think Bowser Jr. would be a fantastic sort of sidekick and or foil to Bowser. The two could have some father-son moments, or comedic chemistry, where one of them gets the short end of the stick in certain situations, and the other commentates on it sarcastically. All of this really just depends on what direction the story would go. Other characters like Toad or Yoshi could have little running jokes about them, such as Toad having an annoying voice, and Yoshi being hopelessly obsessed with food and eating. I'm not saying that these characters should be stereotypes, but I could see them filling such roles in a pilot episode or something to start out with. Ideas aside, one of the first major roadblocks that comes to mind with a more cinematic Mario is voice acting. I think Peach and Bowser at the very least could have full dialogue. As long as they got the right people for the job and gave them quality voice direction, I don't think we'd be looking at a one-to-one replication of Sunshine. But then of course, what do we do with Mario and Luigi? Would we suddenly have to put up with them speaking full sentences and their whimsical Italian accents for the entire game and be expected to take them seriously? Well, I wouldn't say that's impossible, just maybe harder to pull off correctly.
Charles Martinet has provided Mario's voice in more improvised settings outside of the games. And if the story is pretty lighthearted in tone, which I definitely feel it should and probably would be, then I think Mario's accent wouldn't be terribly annoying. Now, if Toad had full lines of dialogue and we had to put up with that voice and take it seriously for the entire game, that might get old pretty quick. I'm in favor of leaving Toad the way he is. But let's pretend the full-length Italian voice idea is out and move on down the list. We could take a look at how the West has adapted Mario into other mediums. Again, dipping into my personal preferences, I appreciated the performances of the role of Mario given to us by Bob Hoskins and the late Captain Lou Albano. They did the best they could given that whole Brooklyn background that Nintendo of America ran with back in the day. I don't know how other people would react if Nintendo tried to pursue that style by giving Mario and Luigi Brooklyn accents in the games or an officially licensed TV show or something, but somehow I just doubt this is a possibility. But whenever I try to actually imagine Mario speaking with anything other than an Italian accent, the Brooklyn one immediately comes to mind. Still, that doesn't automatically mean it would be the right fit. All this talk about voice acting, but I don't think we should rule out the possibility of Mario just staying as a generally silent protagonist the way he is now. If the main series Mario games wanted to keep him and Luigi silent, aside from grunts or yahoos, I think they could still work in a fleshed out story as long as the supporting cast was stronger and could step in to essentially translate for Mario and Luigi. Or heck, pull over Mario and Luigi's Italian gibberish from the Mario and Luigi games. That could work pretty great in letting the brothers communicate and interact with the world around them without actually giving them full speaking roles. But again, the supporting cast would need to be a bit stronger to carry the plot in that case. I still think characters like Peach, Bowser, Bowser Jr., Toadsworth, and so on could do just fine as long as the voice direction is solid and the writing is competent. Even if I'm right, I do still know and acknowledge that the idea of giving any of these characters more of a voice is a bit dodgy, because the only past examples we can pull from are really cringe-worthy 90s cartoons from the West, or the experimental narrative of Super Mario Sunshine. Heck, if you were to ask me what kind of voice I would give for characters like Toad or Yoshi, I honestly wouldn't have any strong ideas. Toad's voice as it is now would get annoying, and when I think of Yoshi having more of a voice, all I can hear is
Fireballs, yum!
Giving Mario games a story would be an uphill battle. I will not argue that. There's so much that needs to be considered and executed properly in order for it to not come out as embarrassing. I'd like to think I've done a pretty good job explaining my thoughts, but I would not blame anyone who isn't convinced. I don't have all the answers, nor do I have any power in changing anything since I have no connections to Nintendo whatsoever. If there is one shining example that comes pretty damn close to the ideas in my head, I think it would be the opening cinematics to the Mario sports games. More specifically, the ones for Mario Power Tennis and Mario Golf Toadstool Tour. The pre-rendered CG still looks pretty good today, despite being on the GameCube. They have a ton of charm, personality, and expression for characters like Wario, Waluigi, and Bowser, all without any consistent dialogue. Just look them up on YouTube if you haven't seen them, and hopefully you'll see what I mean. The humor is very slapstick and has that distinct Looney Tunes flavor to it. It's a very Saturday morning cartoon style, and I think it suits the Mario universe very nicely. This is exactly the kind of story I'd picture in a Mario game. Can you just imagine cutscenes like these in the main games? Showing Mario and his friends interacting with one another or their environment? They'd still have charm and a lighthearted tone. Nothing would be taken too seriously, and there wouldn't need to be a ton, if any, exposition. All I really want is for these characters to feel more like actual characters, for the Mushroom Kingdom to be more than just a series of backdrops. I would like to feel like there was some meaning or purpose to caring about this franchise for as long as I have. I mean, the gameplay is plenty of validation already, but I'd like something just a little bit more. So what do you make of all of this? Do you see any potential for Mario to have a story, and if so, how do you think it should be executed? As always, feel free to express your thoughts down below. Thanks for watching. This has been Brawlmaster012, signing off.